Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Freya, as you know, and I'm going to start this course on deschooling by actually giving you some of my own story about how I came to unschooling and why I'm interested in this topic of deschooling. So I have two sons who are now 19 and 15. And I started home educating in 2006. So that's quite a long time ago, when my eldest son was just 5. So he never actually went to school. And in fact, really, it was the way he was and how he was reacting to preschool at the time that led me to think I've just got to figure out some other option than school, because I couldn't figure out how he was going to fit into school. Partly because he just was absolutely determined to do what he wanted, when he wanted, how he wanted. He was just really self-directed. Like he wanted to learn about all sorts of stuff and do all sorts of things, but he just hated being told what to do. And he was also really highly sensitive and just had these huge emotions. So, he was very joyful, but he also had these massive meltdowns and tantrums and rages and night terrors. And it was just like this massive emotional sort of roller coaster. And I just couldn't figure out how that sort of, those really, really big emotions were going to work in a school context when he just was really sensitive to the whole environment around him. So, and eventually he just refused to go to preschool. He just said, no, I'm not going anymore. And physically, like I couldn't physically get him there. He was like braced against the door, sort of like absolutely refusing to go and saying, look, I just want to stay home with you and my little brother. And so I was like, okay, right, what do I do now? And very fortunately, and possibly partly the reason he refused at that time was we had actually met some homeschoolers. And it was like, oh, there's people who don't go to school and it's okay. And they're having a great time. And there are groups and there are play groups and all this sort of stuff happening. So I think he noticed that as much as I did. And all of a sudden we could see, there was an alternative to sending him to school. So I did, I talked to every homeschooler I could find and read every book I could find. And I did actually realize that there was this thing called unschooling, although I didn't really meet any unschoolers for quite a while. But I figured that was probably the way we were going to be heading, since my son just wasn't going to be told anything. Like he wouldn't sit down and do a workbook or anything. He was wanting to watch documentaries about this and build Lego and make things and run around in the park and all sorts of things that just, weren't fitting into a school sort of setting. So the other thing that happened was when he was 6, which is sort of after we'd already decided to home educate, he was at a friend's place and they had a PlayStation and he discovered video games. And basically from the moment he played his first video game, that was all he could talk about, think about. He was just totally focused, in love with gaming. So he begged us for months and months to get him a PlayStation for Christmas, which we did. And that was the beginning of this wild journey with gaming, because I hadn't played any games. You know, this was 2006, 2007. I had no clue about gaming and no exposure. I had all the stories in my head about how it wasn't good for kids and they should be outside playing, or they should be making stuff, or they should be going on bushwalks or whatever, but definitely not video games. It was just not on my radar at all until it just was right there in front and center. Okay, this is what my child is absolutely passionately interested in. What am I going to do now? So when I talk about deschooling, I talk about the school mindset and all the sort of beliefs you have about education, and I also talk about all the fears that come up when you depart from the school way. And I have had so many fears come up over the years. Like it's just been a huge journey for me, because I come from a really school background. Like my parents are university academics. I was a university academic. I was teaching law for 15 years in university. In the midst of all this, studying homeschooling, I was trying to finish a PhD. So that's about as schooled as you can get. So it was just such a massive reorganization of my brain to try and get my head around how this unschooling thing was going to work. So I had so much to unlearn and to deal with, because my son and his little brother, you know, followed suit really quickly. He was gaming and up to his eyeballs in Lego and all this sort of stuff by the time he was like 2 or 3 years old. He was like right behind his brother and right in there. And they were just off, you know, doing their thing. And I was like, okay, what do I do? How does this work? So that was the situation that I was in, and I didn't really know what deschooling was then. But how would I define it now? Well, I would define deschooling as a process of like dissolving the barriers to a child's natural, joyful learning process. So I knew I wanted to be able to support my child's learning, and I wanted to support them in learning the way that they wanted to, you know, that was going to be joyful and exciting and really interesting for them. So I realized pretty early on that the barriers to that joyful love of learning were in my head. You know, it was my thinking, my fears, my beliefs about what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing that were going to put a dampener and get in the way of that natural learning process. So that sort of brings me to, well, how do I define unschooling, which is, as I said, where I figured we were going to be heading. And the way I define it would be just as a natural learning process, like it used to be called natural learning. And then the term unschooling sort of became very popular in the US. I mean, I'm not against school, so I don't have any sort of, I have a few issues with the term, but it's stuck and it's what everybody sort of knows now, so we just go with that. But I used to always just call it natural learning. And I've come to see also that it's very much about child-led or self-directed learning. So essentially it's trusting the natural curiosity, the natural desire to learn that we all have, that we're all born with, that all children have. So there's this inherent desire, there's this inherent curiosity, there's an inherent creativity, the desire to communicate, to learn new skills, to acquire new knowledge. And of course, we can all see that really clearly when we've got a toddler that's, learning to walk or learning to talk. That intense desire to learn is really self-evident and obvious in young children. And yet, for some reason, our society thinks that just stops at 5 or 6, that suddenly somebody else should take control, and an institution should be brought in to teach the child. And this innate motivation and desire to learn is often just overlooked. So unschooling is about really going back to what we know about learning from our youngest days and from seeing our children in their infancy, and just saying, okay, well, we trusted our children to learn to walk and talk and all those things that they learned between when they were born and 5. We trusted that process and we supported it and we helped them along and we figured, helped them figure things out. We can just continue to do that. We basically just keep going, supporting and encouraging and providing resources for our children, and their innate desire to learn will continue in all sorts of directions, but they'll basically want to learn how to function in a family, in a society, how to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge to become, adults. They can see it, and they will actually naturally go in that direction. So that's my sort of thinking around unschooling, and that would be contrasted with what I call the school mindset. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the school mindset because you probably all went to school. And it's all about controlling and directing learning. So it's also a very passive, it puts children in a very passive role, and they're to be fed information, and they're to have, they're to be taught rather than to direct the process themselves. And I guess I saw pretty clearly that there's a lot of control needed to keep children, to keep their attention on the school curriculum and to keep them in those institutions. And there's a lot of discipline and punishment built into the school system. And I was really against that right from the start. I guess intuitively, and because of my background, in law, I think that was related. I was actually really against punishment and using sort of authority to get children to do what you wanted to do. So I was very much in the sort of peaceful parenting, although it wasn't really a thing in such a long time ago. But I already knew that I didn't want to go down that path with my kids, and so I didn't want to put them in an institution that was based on punishment and control and rewards and grades and all that sort of stuff. I just really didn't like that, and as it turned out, they refused to be part of it anyway, so we just went our own way. So the other aspects of the school mindset, of course, is that, you know, this curriculum and the whole grading system, there's not only a set idea of what children should learn, there's a very inflexible timetable of when they should learn particular things, particular skills, particular information. And as you know, they're in a grade if they're not actually ready to learn to read at age 5 or 6 or whatever. That's too bad, because that's when they're going to get taught. And if they don't get there, then they're going to be told that they're failing, or that they're stupid, or that they're not good enough in some way. So that is just part of the system. It's just how it works. So it's very much based on do as you're told and learn what you're told. And, you know, you should learn this school curriculum in all its detail. And it's so detailed. You know, I've fully immersed myself in the school curriculum over the years. And it's pretty mind-boggling to think that children should be having to learn all of that. But anyway, that's another issue. So that's just sort of how I would describe the school mindset. So when you decide to home educate, a number of things happen. All of a sudden, instead of the institution of the school and the teachers being responsible for your child's learning, now you think you're responsible for their learning. And that in itself can freak you out big time, because if you think of it in terms of a responsibility, that you have a responsibility to basically replicate what is being done in school, then that's a really, really tough job. And I know a lot of homeschoolers actually do attempt to school at home, and some of them are successful. Some of them do an absolutely brilliant job. I mean, I've met lots and lots of home educators in the last 15 years, and some of them are just doing an absolutely brilliant job of school at home, or, you know, some form of following a curriculum with their kids at home. And, you know, hats off to them. That's fantastic if it works, but there is absolutely no way it was going to work for my kids, because of their temperament, because of their personalities, because of the things that they were interested in. And I guess also because I just wasn't into being a controlling parent. I just didn't want to go down that path. So it was just not on the radar. School at home was just never going to work for us. And when I met those homeschoolers, I thought, wow, how do you do that? I mean, really, this is amazing. Really amazing. But I also met a whole lot of parents who school at home wasn't working for them either. And there's basically the whole spectrum, you know, in the homeschool community. There's people doing school at home for whatever reason, whether it's religious or ideological, or just because it works for them. And then there's a whole range of other people who are doing eclectic homeschooling, or a bit of this and a bit of that, or they do lessons for maths and English, but unschool the rest. And then there's, you know, every variation right through to unschoolers or radical unschoolers, which is where I ended up heading. So yeah, there's a whole lot of things happening, but basically what's happening for everybody who home educates is they're having to step outside the system, and that does bring up fear. That does bring up anxieties. Just that stepping outside your comfort zone, stepping outside what you're familiar with, and also it's fear of, like, how's this going to go? You know, what's going to happen in the future? There's a lot of fear of the future. How is it going to, where's it leading? Big fears about failure. I had this. And also a massive fear of other people's judgments. And this was like a really real thing for me, because my parents absolutely hated the idea of me home educating my children. Like, they were so opposed. And I was really scared of their judgment, their lack of acceptance, their opposition, the lectures that I was getting. I was being told that I was negligent, and that I was doing this crazy experiment with their grandchildren. And it was really, really full on for years. In fact, they were opposed for 10 years. So I had lots of time to face my fears, and to face all this judgment that was coming at me. And it wasn't just my parents, it was my siblings and all sorts of other people as well. So the fear that I might fail, their judgments brought up all my doubts. So am I failing my kids? Am I doing enough? There's a sort of a list of like the top fears that homeschool parents have, and I've had all of them. That am I doing enough is always on the list. Am I doing enough to help my children in their education? The fear of your child falling behind, or your child failing, is another big one. Fear that they're interested in all the wrong things, that they're not interested in what they should be interested in. They're not learning to write, they're not learning to read, or they're not sitting down and doing maths. They're interested in gaming, or they're interested in dancing, or whatever it is, but they're not, the fear that they're not interested in the right things, and that the things they are interested will harm them. I mean, obviously that's a big fear for people whose children are really into technology, or watching movies or television or gaming, or any of those sort of things, because there's so many messages given to parents about how incredibly harmful those things are. So there's a fear of your children being harmed. There's a fear of being punished by authorities if you're caught as an unregistered homeschooler, or you're not going to get registered, or how the hell are you going to manage to register your children and get through this process when they won't sit down and do the schoolwork? That's just a really big fear, and that comes up so often. So that's one I will be addressing directly in this course. And also the fear that, if they don't pass registration, is the fear of you being told that you have to send your child back to school, or, that something awful will happen. So there's often a fear of authority or punishment coming down on you as a result of taking this path. So the thing about fear is that it drives control. So if you get scared, which is almost guaranteed that you are or will be really scared at some point, then like one way it can go is for you to try and control your children and get them to do, fit more in the box, so, it eases your fears. And that can work. And it can also lead to a lot of stress and struggle and tension in your relationship with your children. So this sort of brings me to the last sort of thing I want to talk about tonight, which is, well, why deschooling? Why would you want to try and get out of the school mindset? Why would you want to confront all these fears? And I suppose my biggest reason is that you would do it because you want to nurture that love of learning in your children. You don't want to kill it. You don't want to dampen it. You want to nurture it. And what I see is that the school system and also, you know, any attempt that I made with my sons to try and control and direct their learning, it just got met with massive resistance. And then there was all this stress and there was all this tension. And then they dug their heels in and they didn't want to do this. And then there was nagging and it was just like, you know, it's really stressful. So if you want to nurture the love of learning and the joyful process, that's a really good reason to deschool yourself. And also if your children are recovering from being in school, and I know there are a lot of people who have children who need to recover from a process from being in school, then my suggestion is to basically deschool yourself, you know, try and deal with your fears and your thoughts about education, and give your children as much room as possible to just do their own thing, you know, because I actually think the innate love of learning springs back really beautifully if children are given the space and the encouragement to do what they want to do, whether that's play all day in whatever sort of form that takes. Play is learning and learning is play, and the two go hand in hand. And if you give your children space to play and explore their interests, then their love of learning will recover, which doesn't mean that they will recover a love of doing schoolwork. See, a lot of people assume, oh, I'm going to deschool the kids and I'll deschool, we'll just have a break, and then suddenly some spontaneous thing will happen and they will discover a love of sitting down and writing in a workbook and everything will be fine. Well, it could happen, but it's also quite possible that it won't. In fact, it's more than likely that it won't, actually. Because if you give your kids the space, they will go off in all sorts of directions. And sure, they might at some point really enjoy sitting down and learning handwriting or doing some maths, or you might discover that they're actually what I would call like a experiential learner, you know, a learner that really wants to do things hands-on. So they might want to learn through cooking things with you, or digging in the garden, or building Lego, or playing on the PlayStation, or whatever it is. You know, they might want to actually learn through doing and making and creating and communicating. So the process of deschooling and the giving the kids space to deschool is not, it's problematic if you have expectations about what the outcome of that is going to be. In fact, getting rid of your or questioning your expectations about how this is all going to look, how your children's education is going to look, is one of the big aspects of deschooling, because we have this picture in our head. And I actually spoke to somebody just yesterday who was really interested in unschooling and wanted to go down this path. And I know she had this picture in her mind of what unschooling was going to look like for her family, and all the wonderful museums that they were going to visit, and the gardening and the bushwalks and the walks on the beach, and that was there was this beautiful vision that she had of what it was going to be like. And her child was absolutely focused on technology and wanted to not game, but, you know, spend hours looking up about black holes on YouTube and like absorbing information like a sponge. And this child was only 4 years old. So, but saw technology as the tool for getting this knowledge that she desperately wanted to absorb. So if we have a preconceived idea, not only of a school mindset, but even of an unschool future, any sort of preconceived idea or expectation that we have that we then put on our child can cause stress and struggle. So I guess for me, the other main reason why to deschool is to have a peaceful life, you know, to have a joyful, close, harmonious relationship with my children, and to have a sustainable, you know, have homeschooling be sustainable, not constantly stressful, not a big struggle, but actually a really fun, relaxed, joyful process. And to have the quality of my relationships with my two sons as the center of that. And for that, for me, that was probably the most important thing. And because of the temperament of my children, actually, we focus so much more on relationship than on school work or education or anything like that. In fact, for the first, I don't know, 4 years or so, I didn't really think much about education, because I was just trying to handle the daily, you know, dramas and tantrums and all the other sort of relationship issues. That's what I was really focused on. And I ended up writing a book about it because it was such a incredibly steep learning curve for me, just to learn the tools to relate to my children in a really a positive and respectful and joyful way. So that was a huge journey, and unschooling and deschooling was all part of that. So having said that's why to deschool or even to unschool, the question is, well, if you want to deschool, how do you do that? And that is a really relevant question, because it doesn't just happen by magic. You know, you can't just, unfortunately, take the little program chip, the school chip out of your head and say, okay, I'm done with that. I found it was a long process, and there were tools that I used that made a huge difference in making that process a lot smoother and a lot easier. So that is what I'm going to focus on next week, is the how. How do I deschool? How do I deprogram my brain? How do I question these beliefs that I have about how it should be? And how do I question all the fears that come up? How do I question my own fears? How do I deal with my parents? How do I deal with my husband or wife or friends or whoever thinks it's a crazy, terrible idea? How do I deal with all of that? And what tools can I use to actually assist that process? So there's actually a worksheet for next week, which there's a link to in the course document, which would be great if you could download that, because we will be using it and going through this process of questioning your thinking, and you'll get the opportunity to actually have a go at dissolving your greatest fear or the thing you're really stuck on, if there's anything like that, you know, in relation to this whole home education thing. So that's what we'll be looking at next week, is how to deschool. And then in the third week, we'll be looking at how do you fit into the legal framework. So if you follow your kids and you let them direct their learning, how do you then manage to fit back into the legal requirements? And that, of course, is a really big and important question, because most of us will need to fit into the legal requirements. I'm in New South Wales, so that's the jurisdiction I'm most familiar with, but I have had a lot of contact with homeschoolers all over Australia, so I understand the similarities and the differences, not the fine detail, but I've certainly got contacts where we can pull up to get some more information about the detail if it's needed. But basically, I'll be talking about how to translate what your child is actually doing and what they want to do into the language of the curriculum. And so you can tick the boxes and you can pass registration. And I'll be, as you've seen in the course document, there's some samples of how I did that. And I'll also probably add some more resources and references and stuff into that course document as we go along as well, just to, as they come to me, I'll keep feeding stuff in there. So the document will change as we go along. Okay, so I think that's probably enough of me just talking, and I will now unmute. There we go. So I've unmuted, I think. Yep, I've unmuted everybody. But if you've got background noise or you don't want to talk or ask questions, you know, you can feel free to keep yourself muted. And yeah, because obviously we don't want a lot of background noise. So if there is any, I might need to mute people, but at the moment, not a problem. So I'm just going to move that. Okay. Now I'm just going to change the view for myself so I can see more people. Okay, so it looks like most people have got their video off. So I might move it back. Okay, well, I'm happy just to take questions. If you want to just speak up, then I should be able to answer. If you want to use the chat to ask a question, that's fine too. So you can just wave or something if you, or speak up and it'll. Or you can just introduce yourself or whatever you like.
I'll ask a question.
Okay, thank you.
So I might be quite particular. What did you do with your son who wanted to do gaming? Did you let him play gaming regularly every day?
Yes.
And you were able to link that back to the curriculum or aspects of it?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what I did. As I said, I did have a lot of fears come up around it. He didn't sort of do it all day, every day, because he still liked going outside and playing with his friends and playing with his brother and playing with Lego. And, you know, he had lots of other interests. But as the years progressed, he got more interested in gaming, and then his brother was gaming with him, and then they had a whole group of friends gaming together. So it dominated their interests and their time, and I made the decision to go with it. So I got fully involved. I was playing the games with them. I was sitting with them. And doing that, I was able to actually see what they were learning. And I was blown away. You know, it was absolutely such an eye-opening experience for me to to see the level of skill involved, but also all the different facets. I mean, they went through a lot of different games over the years. They were gaming for 10 years, basically, as the sort of number one activity. And I mean, Minecraft was huge. They started when Minecraft was like first invented. And that went on for about 5 years, I think. Anyway, there were so many different games. It was a massive learning curve. And yes, we did pass registration and it was fine. So I did manage to do that translation. Yeah.
And so your son, your oldest son, is 19, I think you said. So how do you feel? I mean, I know he's only 19, he's not, 40, but how do you feel, not that he compares to other 19-year-olds, but how do you feel he is in society at the moment? Does he function well? Is he got a job? Is he, can he write? Can he,
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about his journey. I figured out when he was about 10 and he hadn't learned to read or write that there must be some problem here. I figured out he was probably dyslexic. I never got him diagnosed at that stage, but it became really pretty obvious around about 10 or 11 that because he was asking for us to help him learn to read, and the help that we were giving, it was just not helping. He wasn't managing to pick it up. So and my husband and I are pretty good teachers, so we knew there was some mismatch, there was something going on. Anyway, my son, we got various, I took him to at least probably only one professional who gave him some assistance, and he only stuck with that for about 3 months. And then he said, oh, look, this is boring. I'm not interested in doing these exercises. I'm just going to go back and play my games, and I'm going to work it out for myself. And I sort of took a deep breath and had a quiet panic and thought, okay, well, here we go. And anyway, that's what he did. So he taught himself to read and write playing video games. I was there reading for him and with him and continued to be involved. He could read competently by the age of 15, which is obviously very late for an average child, but not for a child with severe dyslexia, which he's later been diagnosed as having severe dyslexia. So, but at age 15, I think it was 15, he also decided to learn a musical instrument. He took up the clarinet. He decided he wanted to play tennis. He really broadened his interest in a whole lot of things. He took up photography, turned out to be really good at musical instruments. Like, he really took to playing the clarinet. And then at age 17, he decided he wanted to go to school. And I almost fell off my chair because it was just so out of the blue. And I just didn't see that coming at all. And he hadn't done any formal schoolwork up until then. Like, he'd sat down with his dad and done a bit of maths, probably for a few months, primary school maths. Anyway, he decided he was going to go to our local community college, and which is like for just year 10, 11, 12, and it's 4 days a week, no uniform. It's a pretty chill sort of place. And he and 4 of his homeschool friends from the same cohort all decided to go together. In fact, he talked a couple of his friends into it, and they went off to school and they had an absolute ball. They really, really loved it. And he got some great support from the school with his dyslexia. He had they had a person sitting in the classroom with him to help him with the maths, and they allowed him to use a device to type on his phone or laptop, and to help with the reading and stuff. And he got his HSC. He did really well.
Wow, that's
Finished.
great news.
Yeah, he even chose to do maths, which was really difficult for him. He chose to do it even though it wasn't compulsory, just to give it a go. So he was really proud of himself. We were really proud of him, that he just had a good experience and he learned some cool stuff and he made heaps of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's working part-time, playing the cello in a string orchestra. I mean, most of his plans for this year have sort of been derailed because he wanted to go overseas and he wanted to play in 3 orchestras and do all this sort of stuff. And that obviously hasn't been able to do all the things he wanted to do. But yeah, it's all worked out really well for him. Okay. And my other son, who's 15, he actually decided to go to school this year too. Possibly a bit inspired by his brother, although he really wanted to do a different thing to his brother. He's really into the academic side of things. So while his brother just wanted to teach himself and didn't want me to basically teach him anything, his little brother wanted to be taught. So he would nag me to sit down and basically give him tuition in the school subjects every day for years, so he could get, like, this only started when he was about 12, but basically he caught up over like 2 or 3 years. He basically caught up with all the formal schoolwork because that's what he wanted to do. It was entirely self-motivated, and he's gone into year 9 at the local high school this year, and he's getting straight A's. So he's fallen on his feet. He's also taken to playing the piano and is really good at that too. So I couldn't have possibly predicted that it was going to work out that way. Like, no way could I have predicted that. And their friends have gone in all sorts of different directions. They haven't all gone to school. Some have gone to TAFE. Some have gone and got jobs. Some have become artists. They're doing all sorts of cool things. And this was a cohort that were all gaming together for years and years.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds good that it can work out.
It works out, and the beauty of it is, and I can't stress this enough, is the self-motivation that these kids, that has been nurtured or not squashed, is amazing. So when my, boys came and said, I want to learn a musical instrument, they took to it with a passion, because it was, nobody ever had to tell them to practice, nobody ever had to tell my sons to sit down and do stuff, because it was always, the motivation was always coming from within. And it's such a joy. It is such a joy to see that happen and to see things, spark and the interest develop in different areas. It's really something special.
Okay. All right. We're only quite new to homeschooling, so we're probably only about 2 months in, so I'm probably a little bit early to see anything like that. But at the start, we very much tried to follow a program.
Yeah.
And I just met so much resistance. And so I just knew it wasn't right, and we just couldn't do it that way. I couldn't live with the children that way. So we've taken a big step back, and we're just doing a little tiny bit each day. And they choose what they want to do each day. So I've given that control to them. And some days we don't do that at all, and we just go and do other stuff or build with paddle pop sticks, or I don't know, whatever we find that day. So but I guess I'm being so new and not knowing a lot of people that are, say, unschooling. I didn't know. I was searching for a little bit of guidance and a little bit of, because I've got all those fears like you
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah.
What if I fail them, and lots of pressure, there's lots of pressure from my family as well.
Yeah.
And I haven't told most of our friends because I
Yeah.
just, I know what they're going to say, and
Yeah.
I need to be ready to be strong enough to go, well, it's going to be okay. And
Yeah.
other people do it as well, and they're my children, so I'll choose
Yeah.
and remember that they're just happy, just
Yeah.
I want that first. I
Yes.
want the happiness first. I want the relationship, first,
Yes.
and then just let the other stuff happen. But there's that fear in my mind that keeps popping in, that I have to just keep kind of going, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. So when I saw your course, I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that's what I need.
Well, that's really what I want to, convey to people, that it will be okay. It's sort of like, that's really what I want to say. It will be okay. You will be scared. It's absolutely guaranteed that it will be scary. And it's guaranteed that you will get judgment pretty much from somewhere. So it really was a matter for me of following my heart and trying to, question all this stuff that was going on in my head. And it's incredibly liberating for the parents. Like for me, it was amazingly liberating, because it's getting out of that mindset of just being told what to do. It's finally getting out of an institutional mindset of just following on and being, I was totally institutionalized. I was up to my eyeballs in the institution. I'd always been a really good girl, and I'd always done what I was told. And then all of a sudden I just went sideways, and everybody freaked out, because this wasn't this wasn't in their plan, It wasn't in my plan either, but that's the way it went. Sometimes having kids does this. It leads you in very unexpected directions.
Yes. So have you met any homeschoolers or unschoolers that kind of seemed like they regretted their decision to unschool, or felt that they should have done it differently, or anything like that? Or most of the time it's quite positive, would you say?
There've been quite a few people I've met. Well, not quite a few. There've been some families who've sent their kids back to school. They were more the home educating, like the school at home crowd, because it's such a hard thing to do. To do that school at home is really, really hard. And the people who try it, like I said, some of them make a great success of it, and a whole lot of others just can't do it because it's just too stressful. And sometimes they end up sending their kids back to school. I haven't had that experience with any unschoolers, because mostly it's the kids who are leading the way. They're like, the kids weren't going to fit into school anyway. They just really, really weren't going to do it. So there weren't that many options, really. You could either unschool and be happy about it, or you could just have this constant drama and fighting and all the rest of it. I have to say, though, that my youngest son went through a period of being pretty down on the whole unschooling thing, because he developed this real interest in academic learning, and he wanted to go to school. He blamed me, for not pushing him harder. And I'm like, there was no, I couldn't push you. You wouldn't do it. But, that was just a sort of teenage thing. Like, if you got to rebel against something and you happen to be an unschooler, then rebelling against unschooling is an option. So, where else do you go? If your parents, they're supporting whatever you want to do, there's not a lot to rebel against except unschooling. So he kind of hated that for a while, but now he's actually he's doing what he wants to do, and he's doing it well. So he's relaxed a lot now. And my oldest is really grateful that we unschooled. He's really grateful, and he's really grateful that that he got all those years playing games, and he had such an amazing experience, and he learned so much. You know, his creativity is just so enriched by all of that experience. And one of the things he learned when he actually finally went to school, even though he had a great time and he did well and he had great friendships and all that sort of stuff, he did end up saying by year 12, he goes, "Mum, this is really killing my creativity. School is killing my creativity." And I'm going, yeah, I could see that coming. But you know, he wanted to have that experience for himself. So yeah, he was quite pleased to get it over, like really, really pleased to get it over with. But year 12 sort of does that to everybody, I think. Yeah. But he's a very creative person, so he really felt it.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you for your questions.
No, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yep. Oh, I can't hear you. Hang on. You're still muted, Katie. Unmute. There we go. Now I can hear.
Yeah. The main reason I'm doing this course is for my daughter. She's 10 years old and she was severely bullied at school.
Yep.
And since I've started homeschooling her, it has to be school-based. Everything has to be school-based. If it's not school-based, she ends up with really bad anxiety. How can I get her out of that school mode, if you see what I mean? I think because she was so severely bullied, I think her schoolwork was her escape.
Yeah, right.
The bullies. So, and I just want to know how to get her out of that school mode.
Well, I guess I would question why you would want to get her out of it. Like if that's really what she's focused on, I guess I would try and support her as much as possible in that, and then see where it leads.
But I find she goes over the top. If there's like not 30 questions of maths, then she hasn't done enough.
Yes.
And if there's no English questions, if there's not 30 questions of English, then she hasn't done enough.
Well, I think the thought I have there is that she might have a fear of going back to school.
Yeah, true.
Because if she's thinking she's got to keep up, because if she goes back to school, then it'll all be, down on her again. That would be really driving her anxiety, I think.
Yeah.
So I guess if you could reassure her that she doesn't have to go back to school if she doesn't want to.
Yeah.
That it's her choice.
Yeah, I've been explaining that to her, but it's just her having to do this work. It just worries me that she just pushes herself, and it's just...
I think explaining to her that that home education isn't actually about having to do all that work.
Yeah.
That she's not going to get tested. I mean, that's the other big thing. Like a lot of kids have a fear of being tested, and being found to be not good enough. And one of the beauties of home education is that your child need never be tested ever, ever. And even when you go to pass registration, they're not testing the child. They're not assessing the child. They're assessing the parent.
Right.
And whether you're actually providing, you know, the opportunities for your child to learn.
Yeah.
So at no point is your child tested, and at no point are they ever going to be told that they're not doing enough. So if you can tick the relevant boxes as a parent, you don't even have to tell your child what boxes you're ticking. My children were completely oblivious to my process of record keeping and preparing for registration, which only happened every second year in New South Wales when I was doing it anyway. But they just didn't care. They just went and did what they wanted to do, and I took care of the whole registration thing. And when the inspector came, because they came to our house, when the inspector came, they'd be sitting there playing their games, and they'd say hi, and he'd say hi, and he'd talk to me. And so there was never any judgment of them. And I think if she sort of understands that, and she knows that you're going to actually, you know, take care of that, that she's not going to be tested, that she can actually, I mean, she may just still want to, you know, keep doing it to some extent anyway. But I think if you just provide her that safety net to know that she's not going to get thrown back in that environment that was so painful for her, that it'll take a while. It'll take a while for her to relax. And I guess the difficulty now is that it's probably hard to meet up with other homeschoolers because there's such a benefit in making some connections for her and for you with other home educating families who are fairly, you know, who have been doing it for a bit longer and who are more relaxed about it, and, you know, that she can actually feel that it's okay, you know, to relax a bit. So that's something that will hopefully open up for you in the next few months, that possibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah. Okay, anybody else have a question?
Hi.
Here we go. Who have we got?
David.
Hello.
Hi. I guess this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but just based on what you just said and about not being tested.
Yeah.
I can emphasize, see where you came from in terms of your, you know, the schooling background. I'm an engineer, share a lot of that, and I came up a classical way, obviously. I hadn't even thought that far ahead. My girls are 9 and 7, just turned 9. But what happens when I went through school? You had to meet certain requirements before you could go into, say, college or university. You had to have certain grades.
Yep.
If you never get fully tested, what happens when you get to that age if you want to go and do certain jobs that I would assume would require? I'm not. It's too soon to say the kid's going to go to university or anything like that.
Yep.
You know, and I'm open to the fact that they may never do.
Yeah.
That's fine. But if they wanted to be a vet or a veterinarian nurse or something like that, presumably you have to meet. How do you show that then if you don't take the classical exams?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And the answer is there are lots of different pathways that are open, a really surprising number of different pathways. So for example, some children who want to, like, have the option to go to the university, they decide to go to school for the last 2 years, which is what my eldest son did. He thought, I might want to keep my options open, see what it's like. So he went to school just for the last 2 years to get that qualification. Some people do it through TAFE, and you can either do like the equivalent of year 12 through TAFE, or you can actually just go into a TAFE course that interests you. And if you pass that, that can actually provide a gateway to either pursuing that as an interest or going on to university. So for example, I've known a couple of kids who've gone to TAFE and studied horticulture or studied music technology or something like that, and they've gone in at age 16 or 17, and they've passed those qualifications, and they've either gone to the next stage in TAFE, or they've gone and got a job or an apprenticeship, or in some cases they've gone on to university based on their specific interest. So the guy who did music technology at TAFE ended up going to university and studying music at university. So he never had to do, the whole range of subjects. Well, he did them, but he wasn't ever tested on all of them. He sort of got in with his particular passion into higher education. And some kids actually don't even go to TAFE or school. They do bridging courses to get into the university of their choice. So there's a number of universities in Australia that will let students, they either have their own tailored bridging course. Here in Wollongong, the University of Wollongong has its own entry pathway for students who haven't gone to school. Or there are universities where you can actually just enroll at whatever age. I know of a girl, 15-year-old, was passionate about drama and stage performance, enrolled in a university, did a couple of courses online, passed them, and then got full entry into a degree program when she was only, 16, 17. So I'm aware of a number of people who've done that. So there's lots of different ways. And in fact, there are whole Facebook groups that I'm aware of that are dedicated to just that. What pathway can my child, follow to get where they want to go? And there's a surprising, some universities will accept students, home educated students, just on the basis of a portfolio. In fact, when I was teaching law, there were home educated students coming in to even a law degree that had found their way in there without ever having passed, school tests. So sort of where there's a will, there's a way, pretty much.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Does anybody else have a question? Can't see everybody, so I don't know. Nope. Okay. Well, that's fine. If you don't have any questions, you might think of some between now and next week. And if you have, if you do have questions, bring them along next week. And also, if you do have any concerns at all about how home education is going, or you're stressed about anything in particular, bring that along next week, and I will do my best to help you dissolve that that issue in your mind, because that's really what deschooling's about. It's about actually just dissolving the barriers and really getting to enjoy your journey with your child in whatever way they're going, whatever their passions are, whatever their style of learning is, or their challenges. I mean, kids have challenges, all sorts of challenges, and and helping them through that as a supportive person rather than as somebody who's trying to control what they're doing it's such a different way of being, and it's so much more enjoyable. So that's what I'm here to sort of encourage and hopefully inspire, and help with any concerns that you have. So if we don't have any questions, I will see you at the same time next week, and I will put the recording up tomorrow. So if there's anybody who wasn't able to listen tonight, the recording will hopefully be on the course document. There will be a link there tomorrow. So thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Okay, bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sarah. Bye.
Bye-bye.